It started with a stack of receipts that didn't look like ours. On a Tuesday evening, I was clearing the little tray by the door where we toss mail and keys and all the paper we intend to deal with later. I was looking for a warranty slip, nothing important, when I found a thick curl of white paper rubber banded together. The top receipt was from a restaurant I'd never heard of. Linen tablecloths, the kind of place where the menu lists wines by region and vintage instead of color. The total wasn't outrageous, but it was out of character for us on a weeknight. Underneath were more cafes across town we didn't frequent, a boutique shop known for corporate gifts, and a florist that sold arrangements too elegant for birthdays. I told myself it was nothing. Anna's office had been entertaining more clients lately. She'd said as much over dinner the week before. Deal flow, she called it, with a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. The receipts could be for work, expenses she'd be reimbursed for later. That was plausible. That was the version I wanted. For most of our marriage, our lives ran on a dependable rhythm. We shared a calendar, a grocery list, the comforting repetition of small rituals. Friday night noodles from the place on the corner, Sunday morning coffee we made too strong, a midweek walk if the weather behaved. We were good at the ordinary. We used to joke that we were aggressively medium, in the best way, no chaos, no drama. Just us. The first change wasn't the receipts, not really. It was her stories drifting toward the same halo of words. Meetings, clients, follow-ups, without any flesh on them. Anna had always been a talker. If someone at work made a pun so bad it needed documenting, she would recite it over the sink while drying plates. If a presentation went sideways, she'd tell me the whole anatomy of the disaster, from fonts to faces. Lately her reports had been trimmed to the bone. Busy day, she'd say, turning away to plug in her phone. Lots of moving pieces. I noticed the phone too, because it had acquired a gravity that pulled her from the room even while she sat in it. It lived face down now. In the evenings, she'd set it beside her plate as if it were a second utensil. When it buzzed, a tiny muscle at the corner of her mouth would move, and she'd excuse herself with a joke. My other boss, crisis hotline. The laughs were smaller than they used to be. None of this is evidence. I know that. Marriages are full of phases, and we had weathered them before. The winter she hated her boss. The spring my mother was sick, and I was more son than husband for a while. You forgive a person's edges when life sharpens them. But the receipts came back to me at odd moments, like a song I couldn't place. Money in our house had always been openly boring. We kept a spreadsheet with tabs for the practical stuff, rent, utilities, the car, and a column for fun that we never filled all the way. Once a month we reviewed it together and pretended to enjoy the ritual. One night, when she said she would be late with clients from out of town, I opened the card account to move a bill and saw new charges already queued to post. A bistro on the river, late. A florist. A rideshare that began downtown and ended near a hotel with a lobby I recognized from someone's wedding photos. The florist and the bistro could be for work. The hotel puzzled me. Maybe her clients were staying there. Maybe. When she came home after 10, she was bright, almost buoyed. She accepted a plate of leftovers and ate with the polite hunger of someone already full. How were your clients? I asked, keeping my tone in the neutral range between casual and careful. She said they were intense but promising. We think we'll get the account. The we stood out, and I tucked it away because you have to decide, sometimes, which words to keep. A week later, she bought a new blazer without mentioning it. I noticed only because the tag string was still in the pocket when I put it in the wash. The blazer looked good on her. She has a way with clean lines and dark fabric. I told her so. She smiled, distracted, and said, It's a write-off, which is not the kind of sentence you say to your spouse when what you mean is, Thank you. I started seeing the person she mentioned more often, Jonas. He had been in 3 of her stories last week, 5 the week before. Now he was a satellite in nearly all of them. Jonas thinks the deck needs more data. Jonas told me the client has a thing about bullet points. Jonas forgot his notes again. Can you imagine? I asked once, lightly, if Jonas was new. She said he transferred in from another office, shrugged, and stirred her tea with an attention that made the spoon sound louder than it should. The first time I tried to push past politeness, I failed. We were doing dishes and I said, "You've been out a lot." Not a question, just a fact placed between us like a folded towel. She kept rinsing, then set a glass upside down and said, "It's that season." I could have asked which season. I could have asked for a map. Instead, I made a joke about buying stock in the restaurant where her office liked to entertain, and she laughed, grateful for the out. I found more receipts. One for a wine bar I only knew by reputation. Low lighting, noise like a hum, whispered proposals in corners. Another for a shop that sells leather notebooks embossable with initials. The date aligned with a day she'd come home empty-handed. "Gift for the team," she said when I mentioned the shop too quickly. "It's silly morale stuff. Don't roll your eyes, we need it." I wasn't rolling my eyes. I was looking at her face and trying to see if she was still inside it. I didn't accuse her of anything. Not then. Accusation felt like dropping a hammer on glass without even checking if the window was open. I told myself I needed to be better than my worry. People end marriages with less proof than I had. People also ruin good ones with more suspicion than I wanted to carry. So I did something smaller. I began writing things down. At first, I used the Notes app on my phone because it felt less dramatic than paper. A date, a brief description, a question I didn't ask. Tuesday, late dinner, said clients from Frankfurt. Charge, Maison Roux, 2 entrees, dessert. Thursday, flowers delivered to office. Receipt at door. Friday, said internal review ran over. Rideshare ended at Westbury. I didn't add interpretations. Just timestamps and simple nouns. Writing helped a little. It gave structure to something that was trying to atomize me. On the bus to work, I could scroll back and remind myself that I wasn't imagining the way facts refused to sit together in the same room. At night, I could tell myself that I was not a jealous person by nature, just someone assembling a puzzle without the picture on the box. The first explicit disagreement came over nothing, which is exactly how these things usually arrive. I'd left a pan to soak. She wanted the sink clear. She sighed in that long, practiced way and said, "I can't carry the house and the office." I said I hadn't asked her to carry the house. She said I hadn't noticed how much she was carrying. We were 2 people handing each other invisible weights and arguing about the number on a scale we couldn't see. Later, in bed, she turned her back and I stared into the dark rectangle of the window and thought about something an older friend once said, that marriages don't break from one big blow so much as they loosen under 1,000 small ones. A letter arrived from the bank about her corporate card. I didn't open it. It wasn't addressed to me. But I saw the statement when she tossed it on the desk in frustration, and it matched the places I'd been quietly cataloging: the River Bistro, the wine bar, the quick morning coffee at a cafe on the way to nothing. She called the card company and talked about reimbursements, about codes and categories, her language brisk and competent. After she hung up, she said, "I swear this system was designed in the 80s. And I nodded like the system was the problem. I remember the night with the flowers because of the smell. She came home late with her hair swept up and a faint citrusy perfume I didn't recognize. "Someone sent an arrangement to the office," she said, setting her bag down. "We split it up so it wouldn't go to waste." She put 3 stems in a jar, and the kitchen smelled like a hotel lobby. I leaned in to admire them, and she stepped back, as if even beauty might be dangerous if we stood too close. Another Tuesday, another client dinner, another charge on the account for a place we had once planned to try together and never did. The plan had been simple: our anniversary that year, dressed a little nicer, pretending to be people with reservations. We ended up making pasta at home because my train was delayed and she'd had a brutal meeting. It had not felt like a loss then. Seeing the restaurant name on the screen now made something complicated bloom under my ribs. I went to bed early that night. She came in later and slid under the covers without reaching for me. "You awake?" she whispered. I made a sleeping sound, then felt a light kiss land somewhere near my hairline. It registered as kindness. It also registered as distance. The mind can hold both. When the month flipped on the calendar, she said she'd be traveling more. "There's a conference," she said. "Then a couple of day trips." She showed me the itinerary on her phone, a neat row of bookings that could have been copied from any professional's march. I nodded slowly, noticing the gap between where she said she'd be each evening and the places where her daytime meetings were scheduled. She must have read my face because she added, "Long days. I'll be wrecked," like a promise to be appropriately tired. I don't know when I shifted from writing facts to also writing the feeling those facts left behind, but it changed the notes. Mon expense, leather gifts, said team appreciation. Felt out of loop. What Jonas thinks, felt like I'm listening to a podcast with one guest. Friday, wine bar, said internal, felt hollow. It was a private ledger with two currencies, both of them mine to count. One Saturday, we went to the market together to reset. That's how we framed it anyway. Fresh bread, loud tomatoes, loud vendors. She wore sunglasses even though the day was gray and kept checking her phone in quick, ashamed little glances. We chose strawberries, and she paid in cash from a slim envelope I hadn't seen her carry before. "Petty cash," she said, too breezy. When we got home, she washed the fruit and filled a bowl, and we ate in silence that managed not to be hostile. It was one of those afternoons that would look happy in a photo and felt like standing in a hall between two rooms. I didn't tell anyone what I was thinking. People want to help by bringing their own stories to your table, and I needed a clear table, not a potluck of other people's hurts. I didn't call my sister because she would have taken the train over and watched my face while I tried to explain something that wasn't yet a conclusion. I didn't tell my friend Peter because he has a generous anger, and I wasn't ready to borrow it. A small, almost stupid thing. I noticed she stopped wearing her old scarf to work. She loved that scarf. It was our Paris souvenir from a trip where everything went wrong and still counted as perfect. One evening I saw it folded at the back of the closet and asked, "You don't wear this anymore?" She said it didn't match anything lately, and I said nothing because the conversation wasn't about fabric. By then, the receipts in the tray had thinned because she'd stopped bringing paper home. Everything goes digital if you let it. The evidence of a life can be erased with a swipe if you organize it well. But the other evidence remained. A new habit of coming home just after the hour when restaurants flipped the chairs. A new word, we, attached to projects that had never included her before. A new way she smiled at the door, like calibrating how much to show. One evening, without planning to, I asked, "Do you want me at one of these dinners sometime?" I aimed for lightness. The question landed heavier than I meant. She hesitated, then said, "There, work." The ellipsis was audible. "It's not fun. You'd be bored." I said I could be bored for free at home, which made her laugh as intended. She kissed my cheek and said, "Another time." We both pretended that another time was a kind of time that arrives on its own. Driving to the store a few days later, I caught her smile at a red light and asked what she was thinking. "A line from a meeting," she said, then added the punchline. It wasn't funny. It didn't matter. I was just glad to be let in, even briefly. This is how you negotiate with your own uncertainty. You hoard the small proofs of tender normalcy and hope they weigh more than the strange. That night, I moved my notes from the phone to a small black notebook with elastic around the cover. Paper made it feel less like an accusation and more like a study. I copied dates and places and left room in the margins for the parts one hadn't learned yet. On the inside cover, in tiny letters, I wrote, "This is not about catching you. This is about not lying to myself." I wish I could say that writing clarified things. It didn't. It only made the shape of the fog visible. But it kept me from making wild leaps. It let me see that the receipts weren't singular errors. They were small, consistent decisions that shifted our center of gravity an inch at a time. The last night of that month, she said she was going to drop off gifts to a client team that had hit a milestone. She held up a bag from the leather shop, the one with the embossed notebooks. "It's silly, but they worked hard," she said. She left a little after 7. At 9:30 a charge appeared on the card for the Riverside Bistro again, 2 mains, and a bottle of wine split in that way waiters do when they sense a celebration for 2. At 10:30, a second charge posted from the florist. "Closed on Sundays," is printed on their website in proud serif type. It was Saturday. They would have been open all day, but she came home with no flowers. When she finally walked in, the air followed her, cold, outside, a little sweet with perfume that wasn't on her dresser. She set the bag on the table, lighter than when it left, and said they were grateful for the gifts. "It makes a difference," she added, then rubbed her eyes. "I'm beat." She wasn't. Her face looked like it had been lit from the inside. I nodded and said, "Long month." And she said, "You have no idea." And I thought that was true in ways neither of us said aloud. I made tea. She didn't drink hers. The cat chose her lap anyway. I watched the steam twist from my mug and realized I had crossed a private line. I could no longer make generous explanations fit around the facts. I could still be kind. I could still be patient. But I couldn't keep telling myself a story I didn't believe. So I closed the notebook for the night and put it on the bookshelf where it wouldn't accuse from the table. I turned off the kitchen light. I checked the locks. I stood at our bedroom door and watched her brushing her teeth, absurdly grateful for a moment so ordinary it felt like proof of something. Then I went to bed and lay awake while the city sounded like a city, and told myself that tomorrow I would keep paying quiet attention, and that when the truth arrived, I would meet it calmly, even if it asked for a kind of courage I hadn't needed before. Suspicion is a strange kind of hunger. It doesn't fill you, it empties you out. The more you feed it, the sharper it becomes. I tried to ignore it, but the notebook on the shelf kept calling me back. Every new inconsistency, every receipt or unexplained delay, wanted its place on the page. So I gave it one. I started methodically. Dates, times, expenses. If she said she was at a restaurant with clients, I checked the card to see if the charge matched the story. Sometimes it did. Sometimes it didn't. A bill for dinner for 2 on a night she said it was. Team drinks. A florist charge when she came home empty-handed. A rideshare drop-off at an address across town, nowhere near her office or our apartment. At first, I wrote quickly, almost frantically, as if I could trap the truth before it slipped away. But as the weeks went on, my notes grew calmer. I drew columns, underlined names, added little arrows connecting one inconsistency to another. It wasn't about catching her anymore. It was about proving to myself that I wasn't going crazy. Her behavior at home was changing too. She used to share everything with me, even the boring stuff, complaints about the printer, the new intern who talked too loudly, the coffee machine that broke every other week. Now, when I asked about her day, she gave short answers, rehearsed ones. Busy. A lot of meetings. Nothing worth telling. It wasn't that she didn't talk. It was that she chose what not to say. And Jonas. His name was everywhere now. He was in her mouth more often than mine. Jonas thinks we should pitch differently. Jonas told the funniest story. Jonas handled the client brilliantly. If I asked a follow-up question, what does Jonas do exactly? Where did he transfer from? She'd shrug, change the subject, or check her phone as if she had somewhere else to be, even sitting in our living room. I tried to be rational. People get close to colleagues. I'd had work friends too, people whose names came up at home because they were part of my daily life. But there was a weight in the way she said his name, a brightness in her eyes that hadn't been there when she talked about work before. The notebook filled quickly. Tuesday. Late with team. Charge, Bistro Lumiere. 2 entrees, 1 dessert. 9:45 p.m. Thursday. Came home 10:30. Said client dinner. Clothes smelled of cologne, not perfume. Smiled too much when asked. Friday. Office closed at 7, she said. Review ran over. Home at 9:15. Rideshare ended near Westbury Hotel. I began to feel like a detective in my own home. Watching, listening, recording. Not confronting. Not yet. Because here's the thing, I was afraid. Afraid that if I accused her too soon, she'd flip it back on me. Afraid she'd tell me I was paranoid, controlling, jealous. Afraid that she'd deny everything so convincingly that I'd doubt myself even more. I needed undeniable proof, the kind you can't argue with. So I kept watching. She bought new clothes. Nothing extravagant, just subtle upgrades. A silk blouse, a tailored skirt, a pair of shoes too elegant for long office days. She wore them on her late nights, not on ordinary mornings. When I complimented her, she brushed it off. Just work stuff. Her phone became another battlefield. She started turning it face down all the time. Once, while she was in the shower, I walked past the counter where it buzzed. A preview flashed before the screen went dark. Last night was amazing. Can't wait for next time. No name visible, just the line. I froze. By the time she came out, the phone was in her hand again, locked, tucked close to her side. I didn't ask. My silence wasn't forgiveness. It was strategy. Even her absences began to follow patterns. Every other Thursday she was out late. Every third Monday, team dinner. Fridays, client follow-up. I plotted them in the notebook like weather cycles. The clouds of lies were moving in regular patterns across our lives. And still, she came home smiling. She kissed me on the cheek. She asked if I'd eaten. She curled up on the couch beside me on nights she was home, though not too close. The intimacy we had built over years was still there, but thinner now, like fabric worn by too many washes. The turning point came with the gifts. One evening, she walked in with a shopping bag from an expensive boutique, the kind of place where even the smallest item costs a week's groceries. She said it was a work thing, that they were buying gifts for clients. I nodded, but later, when she wasn't looking, I checked the receipt tucked inside. The item wasn't billed to her company card. It was on ours. When I asked casually later, "So, did the office reimburse you for that gift?" She blinked too quickly, then smiled. "Oh, right. They will. It's in process." But she never filled out the reimbursement form. I checked the files. That night I wrote in the notebook, "Boutique purchase. On our card. Not reimbursed." For who? I circled the words 3 times until the pen cut into the page. I felt myself withdrawing at home. I answered her questions with shorter sentences. I laughed less at her stories. I started staying later at work, not because I had to, but because I couldn't bear to sit in the apartment wondering who she was texting. friends noticed. One weekend we went to dinner with another couple, and halfway through, Anna left to take a work call. She was gone for 20 minutes. Our friend leaned across the table and said softly, "Everything okay between you two?" I forced a smile and said, "Of course." But inside, I was screaming. The lies grew sloppier. Once, she told me she'd been at a late meeting, but when I checked the calendar she left open on her laptop, the meeting had been canceled. Another time she said she had dinner with 2 clients, but the receipt showed only 2 entrees, 2 drinks, not 3. I began to wonder if she even cared about being careful anymore. Or maybe she thought I wasn't the type to notice. One Friday, I finally tested her. She said she was going to a client dinner, but I knew from the schedule there were no clients in town. I asked, "Where are you going? Which client?" She hesitated, then rattled off a name I recognized from months ago, someone whose account had already closed. The lie was so obvious it almost made me laugh. Instead, I just nodded. She smiled in relief and kissed me goodbye. When she left, I sat in the silence of our kitchen, staring at the door. I realized I had crossed another line. I wasn't just documenting anymore. I was planning. Because suspicion was no longer enough. Proof on paper wasn't enough. I needed to see it with my own eyes. The next time she left for one of her client dinners, I wouldn't stay home. I would follow her. Quietly, carefully. Not to make a scene. Not to shout in public. Just to finally know. Because living in doubt had become worse than any truth I might uncover. I told myself I wasn't going to be reckless. If I followed her, it would be calm, careful, uneventful. No yelling in lobbies, no scenes in restaurants. I wanted confirmation, not theater. The chance arrived on a damp Thursday that smelled like rain even before the first drop fell. Around 6, Anna stood in the doorway with her tote and that new blazer, checking her reflection in the black glass of the microwave the way she always did before leaving. "Don't wait up," she said, too casual to be casual. "It might run late." "What's the restaurant?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She named a place downtown I knew well. There. "Private room for business." It sounded almost responsible. She kissed the air near my cheek and left a faint citrus trace behind, a perfume I still couldn't place among the bottles on her dresser. I waited 10 minutes. I put on my jacket, slid the little black notebook into the inside pocket, and took the car key that didn't jingle. It felt like preparing for bad weather. Umbrella, check. Proof, check. A version of myself that wouldn't break the first time the sky opened, check. Her taillights were easy to pick up at the end of our street. She always drove a touch under the limit, a careful driver to the end. I hung back 3 cars, let a delivery van wedge itself between us, then another. City traffic did me the favor of hiding in plain sight. She didn't turn toward the downtown grid. She took the riverside exit instead, gliding along the water where the warehouses are being turned into galleries, and offices with plants hanging from ceilings. At a light, she tilted her head, laughing at something only she could hear, the glow of her phone brightening her face in the mirror. I made a note of the time and wrote a single word beside it, laughing. She turned left into a neighborhood with low, old brick and new money. I knew the street. We'd once said we should try the bakery there and never did. She drove past the restaurant she'd named and kept going 2 blocks farther, where the lighting turned warmer, the sidewalks narrower. A boutique hotel angled off a corner like a ship at dock, its brass letters announcing a name you only learned by being told. She didn't even circle for parking. A silver sedan pulled from a loading zone as if on cue, and she slid into the space. I passed them, turned the corner, and found a legal spot under a sickly tree. The rain finally began, soft enough to beat on my windshield without running. I walked. Not fast, not furtive. Just a man with his collar up against a drizzle, invisible the way ordinary men are when they walk alone. In front of the hotel, a man stood holding his phone with both hands, checking the door every few seconds as if willing someone through it. He wasn't the caricature I prepared to hate. No swagger, no ridiculous suit. Tall, neat, the kind of face that gets described as kind in eulogies. When Anna stepped onto the curb, he put his phone away in an instant. The smile that opened across his face did something to mine. I felt parts of it stiffen that I hadn't known were moving. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. They closed the distance like a practice thing, her hand on his forearm, his palm finding the small of her back in an automatic, proprietary way. They spoke for a few seconds, heads bent toward each other the way people do when they build their own weather system in public. Then they went in, not to the lounge, not to the bar, but through the revolving door beyond the host stand, where the lifts are, where carpets get thicker and hallways quieter. I stood under the awning across the street and watched the glass door stop spinning. I waited another minute, then two, prolonging the moment where reality could still be negotiated with. The rain made the streetlights look like soft coins dropped on wet velvet. A bellhop pushed an empty luggage cart to the side and cleared his throat in that gentle way people do when they suspect you're hovering with a purpose. I moved on. There's an empty little park half a block down, the kind that mostly accommodates dog walkers, and the odd person having a phone call they don't want overheard. I sat on a bench. The wood was damp. It asked a cold price to be allowed to sit quietly with your thoughts. I took out the notebook and wrote, slowly, so I wouldn't tear the paper, Thursday 7/18, Hotel Vesper. Together. Not the restaurant she named. Went straight inside. Hand on back. Weather system. I underlined together once. I wanted the word to behave, to be less like a verdict and more like a description. It didn't cooperate. I stayed long enough to watch 2 check-ins and 1 taxi drop-off. Somewhere above the lobby level, a blind tilted, then untilted. A man in a conference badge smoked under the awning despite the rain and looked up into it like it might explain his life. In the glass at the edge of the hotel, my reflection was available if I wanted it. I didn't. On the way back to the car, I caught myself doing the thing people in denial do. I invented a softer narrative. Maybe it's a team offsite, I thought. Maybe Jonas is a client in this telling. Maybe the story has a clause I've missed. But the body knows when a story is trying to spare it. Mine knew. I drove home with the radio off. The wipers made a ridiculous squeak at the end of each arc that sounded like a small animal worried about the future. I rehearsed what I would not do. I would not make the kitchen a courtroom. I would not weaponize sleep. I would not turn the next day into an autopsy. I would, however, make a record. At the apartment, the entry light flicked on in that patient way I had always liked. I toed off my shoes and set the notebook on the table like something fragile that had to be kept visible. I poured water and didn't drink it. The cat did the polite cat thing of pretending not to notice anything unusual and then sitting on the notebook anyway, as if to weigh it down. Around 10:30 my phone lit up with a message from Anna, running late. Don't wait up. Love you. I stared at the words, and it felt like the worst kind of arithmetic. You can add, love you, to a lie and the sum is still a lie. I typed OK and nothing more. At 12:11 the lock turned. I didn't pretend to be asleep. She came in with her shoes in her hand, like someone skilled at not waking a house. The citrus perfume had softened into something warmer, hotel soap and rain. She saw the notebook on the table, and then saw me and rearranged her face into the one she wears for us. It fit perfectly, like a garment tailored long ago. How was it? I asked. Exhausting, she said. The client had opinions. A pause on the ellipsis, like she was choosing whether to decorate the lie. She didn't. We ended up at the restaurant I told you. The private room is always freezing. She rubbed her arms as if to demonstrate, then moved toward the bedroom. In the mirror above the console, I watched her watching me watch her. The image was like a badly blocked scene. Everyone knows where the camera is. No one says so. When the door closed, I wrote one more line. 12:11, home. Said restaurant. Not true. I didn't sleep so much as I changed location repeatedly with my eyes closed. Around 4 I dreamed about the hotel carpet and woke with the exact memory of its pattern. A forest of little golden arrows, all pointing the same direction. The next day she texted from work just after noon. A photo of a plate of salad and a caption, health kick. Don't laugh. I typed a tiny white heart, the smallest thing the keyboard would allow. Then I opened the card account again, because I wanted to hurt myself more efficiently, apparently. There it was, Hotel Vesper, bar, 2114. 2 cocktails, 1 dessert. The dessert was called Shared Pear. The cruelty of the name felt personal, even though it wasn't. I printed the transaction because I am old-fashioned in my pain. Paper makes a thing undeniable when your brain is inclined to negotiate. I slid it into the notebook and drew a small paper clip on the margin in case I lost the actual clip. The following days behaved like days do when you've learned something you can't share with the person you learned it about. Banal, petty, normal in the exact places you wish they would crack. She asked if I could pick up her blazer from the cleaner because she had. Back to back. She sent me a link to a lamp she liked and asked if we should change the one by the couch. She laughed at something on her phone and then apologized without saying what for. I gave myself a rule. 1 week. In 1 week I would have a conversation. Not because I needed 7 days to grow courage, but because calendars are a way to keep terror from deciding the agenda. If a person can keep a promise to a future version of themselves for 7 days, maybe that person will be decent at the conversation when it arrives. On day 2 of the week I footnoted my rule with a compromise. If she lies specifically when truth would be easy, move up the date. The compromise felt like giving myself a fire alarm. On day 3, she left her corporate card statement on the desk again. Not carelessness, habit. The itemizations were familiar now, like the chapters of a book you tell yourself you aren't rereading. Wine bar. River bistro. Cafe with the ceramic mugs. Hotel Vesper. At the bottom, a note about non-compliant receipts. I took a photo and then hated that I'd taken a photo. That evening, rain again. She had internal prep. I had a bowl of soup I didn't taste. Around 8, I walked through our rooms as if I were in a rental I was considering. The objects were still ours, but also not, neutral, potential, expensive if you count in memories. I stopped by the bookshelf and that's where I found the thing that made my hands go briefly cold. The embossed leather notebook from the boutique, the one that had been Team Morale. It was on the second shelf, spine facing out. I slid it free. The initials punched in gold on the cover weren't hers. They weren't mine. 2 letters, not J for Jonas, but the same family of clean lines. I put it back where it was. I wrote nothing about it for an hour. Then I wrote a single line, gift not for client. Not ours. On day 4, she came home early and made a point of sitting close to me on the couch. Her thigh pressed against mine, and for a blissful, suspended few minutes, there was nothing but warmth and the silent treaty of a long marriage. We choose each other even when the day didn't. She put her head on my shoulder and said, "We should take a trip when this quarter ends." I asked, "Where?" She said, "Anywhere. Somewhere with ugly postcards." I laughed and felt cruel without meaning to. The notebook was on the table like a guest who'd arrived early. On day 5, I left work early for the first time in months. The meeting that should have stretched to 6 ended at 4, and the sudden space in my evening felt like a dare. I didn't text her. I didn't go home. I drove to the hotel and parked under a different tree. I told myself I would stay 30 minutes. If nothing presented itself, I would go, because a stakeout is just theater with worse seating. 15 minutes in, I recognized the silver sedan before I recognized her posture. The car pulled to the curb. She stepped out, a small box in her hand, the kind that a jeweler uses for rings and a stationer uses for cufflinks. She didn't look around. She didn't hesitate. She walked with that particular, unhurried purpose of someone meeting the person who calibrates their day. He came out to meet her. No kiss. A hand on a forearm. The exchange of the small box, the brush of fingertips that was more honest than any hello could be. They went in together. A bellhop moved the cart again, as if the universe were committed to continuity. I didn't wait for a second act. I didn't take a photo. I walked back to the car and put both hands on the roof because my knees didn't entirely trust me, and the roof was a thing that would not lie to me about its purpose. On day 6, I wrote the conversation. Not a script with lines, but the bones of it, I know. I saw. This is not a debate. I won't live like this. I practiced how my hands would be still on the table, so they wouldn't ask for mercy that my mouth couldn't promise. I decided where the conversation would happen. The kitchen, the room where we usually told the truth about small things, burned rice, forgotten calls, a plant that died because we both assumed the other was watering it. On day 7, she came home with the smell of rain again, structure and sweetness. She set her tote down and said, "I thought of you today at lunch. Someone told a terrible joke about fonts." I smiled because I wanted to be the man who still smiled when she brought me a small offering from her day. Then I pointed at the chair and said, "Can you sit for a second?" She sat. She folded one leg under the other, the pose she uses when she thinks the conversation is friendly. I opened the notebook and placed it between us like bread. I touched the page, then withdrew my hand. I said, "Before I say anything, I need you to know I'm not going to shout." Her eyes changed the way a room changes when a cloud moves in front of the sun. "Okay," she said. I told her where I had been. I told her what I had seen. Not with adjectives. Not with metaphors. Just the days, and the places, and the fact of a hand on the small of her back like a signature. When I said the hotel name, her shoulders dropped by an inch, and in that inch I saw the exact boundary between a story that requires work and one that tells itself. She didn't deny it. She didn't confess either, not immediately. She said, "Why were you there?" And I said, "Because you told me a different address." We stared at each other like people try to stare down a storm. "I don't want to fight," I said finally. "I want it to be clear." "I know." She reached for the notebook, not to read but to move it, as if it were in the way of the person she wanted to be. Her fingers hovered, then fell away. "I'm tired," she said, which was true, and also the wrong sentence at the front of this paragraph. "Me too," I said, and then, very quietly, "Tomorrow. After work. Here." She nodded. "Okay." That night, we moved around each other gently as if we were both injured in ways that required cushions at sharp corners. In bed, she lay on her side with her knees drawn up, and I lay on mine staring at the bookcase outline, counting the books I could name by spine alone. The house made the small honest noises houses make. Somewhere down the block a siren threaded past and dissolved. I didn't sleep much. I didn't plan much either. The conversation had been like loosening a too tight collar, breath possible again, even if the room was still warm. In the morning the light on the kitchen table made the notebook look like any other book. She poured coffee with the caution of someone handling something hot in both senses. "Tonight," she said, as if asking for confirmation of the calendar. I said, "Tonight." We left the apartment together, which felt like a decision. In the elevator, we stood the way strangers do, parallel, polite, not making eye contact in the mirror. At work, I did the useful tasks first, rescheduled a meeting I wouldn't be able to hear anyway, answered the 3 emails no one else seems willing to answer, wrote my team a note that said, simply, "I'll be offline after 3. Then I closed my office door and sat with my hands flat on the desk and told them to learn how to be still. At 2:50, I put the notebook in my bag like it was sacramental. I walked through the lobby and every surface looked more reflective than it usually did. On the train home, I decided to buy flowers, then didn't, then did. White ones you can't assign to a romance without making a mistake. I carried them like a flag I wasn't sure how to position. She was already at the table when I got home. No blazer. Hair down. The embossed leather notebook was on the second shelf where I'd left it. The air felt like the kind of air that arrives before a thunderhead shows you its edges. I put the flowers in a jar. I sat. I opened my notebook to the page with the hotel name and the time and the shared dessert. "Okay," she said, and the word did not mean readiness so much as it meant surrender. "Okay," I said back, and mine meant the same. I looked at her face the way you look at a map of a city you once lived in for years and haven't visited in a long time. Familiar and unhelpful at the same time. I thought of all the receipts, all the late nights, all the small private weather in hotel lobbies. I thought of who we had been on the good days, and on the ordinary ones, which count more. And then I said the first true, full sentence I had said out loud since the park bench in the rain. "I know there's someone else." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't list the exhibits. I just said, "I know there's someone else," and let the word sit between us like a glass of water neither of us could swallow. For a moment, Anna simply looked at me as if she were waiting for a different script to start, one where I cracked a joke or softened the blow. When that didn't happen, her shoulders dropped, and something in her expression, some well-practiced brightness, went out like a light. "Who told you?" she asked, though her tone carried no real curiosity. "No one," I said. "I saw you. Twice. At the hotel." She closed her eyes, just for a second, as if the air in the room had grown thinner. When she opened them again, the first words she chose were procedural rather than personal. "We should talk," she said. "We are," I replied. She glanced at the notebook on the table and then away. "I hate that you were there," she said quietly. "I hate that you saw. I hate that I had to," I said. Silence spread. Outside, the last light of afternoon pressed itself against the window like a polite guest. The refrigerator hummed, keeping its small promise to the milk and the eggs while larger promises failed in the room with it. "His name is Jonas," she said at last, not looking up. "You already know that." "I do. It wasn't planned." She flinched at her own choice of a cliched line. "I'm not asking you to feel sorry for me. I just mean to say it. It started with work. Late nights. Talking about pitches, about how things felt, stuck. And then talking about other things. His mother. The dog he had to put down. I told him about the winter your mother was ill, and how you used to sleep in the chair beside her bed. I told him about our terrible Paris trip that still felt perfect. I don't know when the line moved." "You do," I said gently. "You just don't want to name it." She nodded once, a small, precise tilt. "I didn't set out to betray you. You set out to keep not telling me," I said. "That part was deliberate." Her hands were on the table now, flat, the way a person shows they aren't hiding anything even while they are. She stared at them, as if they might take responsibility on her behalf. I could say I felt unseen, she said. I could say work changed me, that I needed a place to feel competent again, wanted again. I could say 100 things that make it sound like this was a response rather than a choice. But I know that doesn't help you. It helps to hear the real words, I said, not the slogans. Even if they don't fix anything. Her eyes shone, though she didn't cry yet. I've been trying to figure out how to stop without breaking everything, she said. You can't unbreak something by continuing the thing that breaks it, I said. That's not how physics or love works. We sat with that. My hands were steady on the table, just as I had practiced, but my chest felt like an old house in wind, everything holding, but noisily. I thought of the park bench in the rain, of the small box exchanged outside the hotel, of the embossed notebook on our shelf with someone else's initials. Evidence, yes. But also an education. This is how distance teaches itself to be permanent. I'm not going to ask you to prove anything to me tonight, I said. I'm not going to ask you for a timeline, or a ledger, or how many nights were hotels, and how many were just wine. I already know what I need to know. What do you need? She asked. For it to stop, I said. For this version of our life to end. I can't live in a house where the doors are always closed. She inhaled sharply. Are you saying? I'm saying separation, I answered, calm as I could. Not because I want to punish you. Because I want a life I can recognize when I walk through the door. She stared at me the way people look at water when they're not sure how cold it will be. I don't want to lose you, she said. I didn't stop loving you. That's the most awful part. It's both. I believe you, I said, and I did. But love is not a hall pass for lying. Now the tears came, sudden as summer rain. She pressed her fingers to her mouth, a gesture I had seen only once before, in a hospital waiting room a lifetime ago, when we learned news that required a new vocabulary. There was a long, quiet minute where our breathing was the only negotiation possible. What do we do? She asked into her hands. We make this practical, I said, because love had left the building and logistics needed to get in. We divide the things. We make a plan for the account. We decide who keeps the apartment, at least for now. We are decent to each other in public and exact with each other in private. We tell the truth to the minimum number of people necessary and don't collect allies like trophies. She nodded. Okay. Do you have somewhere to stay? Yes, she said. A friend. Good, I said, and hated that the word could be true and also miserable. We opened the laptop. It felt indecent, like taking minutes at a funeral, but the work needed doing. We listed the accounts, the bills that auto-drafted, the subscriptions so small they hid in corners. We spoke in the language of couples who had been together long enough to know which drawer held the passports and which plant would die if someone forgot it for a week. When we were stuck, we defaulted to fair, or as close as we could manage while sitting on opposite sides of a table we had bought together. After we closed the laptop, the room felt heavier. The practicalities had given us something to do with our hands, and now they were still again. I'll pack a bag, she said quietly. Tonight. I nodded. I'll sleep on the couch. You don't have to. I do, I said, not unkindly. She stood and moved toward the bedroom, then turned back. I'm sorry, she said. It was as plain as a sentence can be when there are no decorations left to hang on it. I know, I said. Me too. While she packed, I washed 2 mugs we hadn't used and dried them, and put them away because it felt like a way to remain a person who does the next appropriate thing. The cat sat on the counter and blinked at me as if to say every kingdom falls, and yet dinner is at 6. I filled the bowl. She came down the hall with the suitcase that had learned too many routes lately. The wheels were quieter than I expected on our floor. At the door, she hesitated. "Do you want me to text when I'm settled?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Please." She left. The lock clicked into place with a sound that I had always found reassuring and now felt like a period. I stood very still in the hallway in case any part of the air needed to tell me something, and then went to the couch. I didn't cry. People imagine crying as an inevitable act in these moments, but sometimes the body chooses inventory instead. I made a list in my head: call the bank, cancel the cleaner, tell the landlord nothing yet, buy more trash bags, pick up the blazer from the cleaner on Tuesday because it is still a thing that needs doing even if it might never be worn here again. Only later, when I lay down, did the ache arrive, not as drama, but as a kind of weather inside the ribs. She texted at 10:43. "I'm here. I'll give you space tomorrow." "I'm sorry." I replied, "Thank you." Then I put the phone face down the way she had taught me and stared at the ceiling until the ceiling was not a ceiling but a field, and I walked across it toward a horizon that did not come closer. The days that followed were administrative and unbearable in equal measure. I changed passwords I should have changed years ago. I separated our streaming services, an absurdly intimate act. I called my sister and said, "The short version is we're separating." And she said, "I'm coming over." And I said, "Not tonight." And she said, "Tomorrow then." And that is exactly what happened. She sat on my couch with her feet tucked beneath her and asked good questions with soft edges. She did not say anything unkind about Anna. That was the right gift. I made an appointment with a lawyer, not because I wanted a battle but because I wanted a map. He was the kind of man who looked like an accountant until you heard the sentences he had polished on other people's bad days. He explained timelines, options, what terms mean when feelings try to make them mean something else. He said, "If you can keep it civil, keep it civil. It's cheaper, and it's kinder." I said I would try. At night, the apartment was louder without her in it. The radiator spoke like an old friend at a party who wants to tell you one more story. I took the leather notebook with the wrong initials down from the shelf and put it in a box with things I needed to return. On top of the box, I placed the receipts I had printed, not as a case file anymore but as a history I didn't want to carry inside me when the paper could carry it instead. I slid the box into the hall closet and told myself that moving the evidence did not move the truth, and that was fine. I wasn't trying to change the past, only the weight of it. Friends reached out in the way friends do, some precise, some clumsy, all of them kind. "Do you want to talk or do you want to be distracted?" one text said, which is, I think, the purest mercy. I alternated between the two. I learned which coffee shops were too full of couples, and which ones were friendly to men alone with notebooks. I started running again, not for virtue but for fatigue, the kind that lets you sleep. Anna and I orbit each other by email and text, arranging the polite choreography of separation, a time for her to pick up winter coats, a time for me to be elsewhere when she comes, a note about the cat's vet appointment, a reminder that the landlord needs a signature next month. We are respectful. We use full sentences. We are good at this, and the part of me that loves competence mourns that being good at it means we needed to learn. 3 weeks in, we met at a cafe to go over the last items. It was neutral ground, public enough to keep our voices low, quiet enough to make honesty possible. We sat with a table between us and identical cups of coffee we didn't finish. "How are you?" she asked, which is a question people ask when they want to give you a chance to say, "Fine. I'm sleeping," I said. "That helps." She nodded. "I'm seeing a counselor," she said. "I should have gone earlier." "Good," I said and meant it. "I ended it," she said after a moment. "With him." "I figured," I said, because the sharpness in her had softened and the messages had stopped arriving at odd hours, and because some part of me still cataloged timelines even while the rest of me tried to stop. "It doesn't undo anything," she added quickly. "I know that. I'm not telling you as a plea." "Thank you," I said, and meant that too. We talked about future logistics the way two managers might. The lease, the storage unit, whose name would be on what. When we stood to leave, she touched my sleeve, not as a claim but as a farewell to texture. "You were good to me," she said. "I didn't say that enough." "You were good to me too," I said, because a story is not erased by its ending. "We were good to each other, until we weren't." We smiled the kind of smile you give in museums when you recognize a painting from a book. Familiarity without possession. Back at the apartment, I cleaned the kitchen with a zeal that surprised me. Grief likes labor. I wiped the counters, emptied the cutlery drawer entirely, and then put everything back as if order could be a spell. I took the small black notebook, my notebook, and read the first entry again. This is not about catching you. This is about not lying to myself. It had done its job. I tore out the pages carefully, fed them to the shredder in tidy handfuls, and watched the lines become confetti. I left the cover intact and put it back on the shelf, a hollow thing keeping the space for something I might someday write that isn't about loss. Weeks turned into months the way they always do, whether we cooperate or not. The apartment learned new sounds that belonged only to me. I rearranged the furniture, not because I believed in energy flows, but because I needed the room to stop looking like a diagram of an argument. I bought a lamp that throws warm light instead of cold, and learned which evenings the neighbor plays the piano badly enough to be charming. Sometimes I am ambushed by small museum pieces of our life. A receipt from a bakery with a note she once wrote on the back, a scarf that still smells faintly like winter in her, a playlist that knows us too well. When that happens, I let the memory complete itself rather than slamming the door on it. Then I open a window, literally or otherwise, and do something present tense. Water a plant, answer a friend, make an omelet. If there is a lesson, it is smaller and harder than the ones people embroider on cushions. It is that trust doesn't collapse only once. It erodes like coastline, pulled back a handful of sand at a time, until one day you stand where your porch used to be. It is that dignity is quiet work, closing tabs instead of refreshing them, returning what isn't yours, not auditioning your pain for an audience that didn't buy tickets. It is that love is not proved by how long you endure confusion. It is proved by how cleanly you leave when the truth is finally visible. I do not think of myself as the man whose wife cheated. I think of myself as a person who learned, late and thoroughly, that attention is a form of love that starts with oneself. I pay different attention now. I know where my passport is without checking. I walk to the river and watch the boats make deliberate choices in water that pushes back. I sit in cafes and write sentences that don't need to hold anyone together. Sometimes I see a couple sharing a dessert and I don't flinch. Sometimes I do. Both are acceptable weather. Once, months after, I saw Jonas by accident on a street that did not belong to either of us. He was outside a different hotel, holding his phone with both hands, checking the door every few seconds. He looked like a man waiting for a story to decide what kind it wanted to be. I kept walking. I didn't feel anger, which surprised me. I felt distance, which is kinder. Anna sent a postcard from a city we'd once meant to visit together and never did. The front had an ugly photograph of a fountain, exactly the kind she had said she missed. On the back she wrote, "I hope you're sleeping well. I hope the plant is still alive." I put the card on the fridge. The plant, for once, was thriving. If you asked me for a moral, I'd tell you I don't trust morals anymore. They're too tidy for ordinary lives. What I have instead are practices, Tell the truth before the truth has to tell on you. Don't keep evidence longer than you need to remember what happened. Choose decency over spectacle, and when the season changes, let it. Stand on the new shoreline. Name the water. Then build again, not as if it can't fall, but as if you can. One evening, I walked past the boutique hotel on purpose. The lobby lights were the same soft gold. A bellhop moved a luggage cart the same way. I stood on the opposite curb long enough to prove to myself that my feet could occupy that square of pavement without melting. Then I went to the bakery 2 blocks away, the one we had once promised we'd try, and bought bread still hot from the oven. I carried it home in a paper bag that warmed my hands, and for the first time in a long time, the door to my apartment opened onto a room that felt like mine. I put the bread on the table, turned on the new lamp, fed the cat, and smiled at the quiet. The house made its small, honest noises. I did too.